Good afternoon. Whoa, great. Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Simone Wallace. I am the campaign director for Restore Mississippi River Delta. We're grateful to have you here today. My job here today is pretty quick. It's a good one and it's an easy one. So again, we want to thank everybody for being here today. I had a chance to be on a panel yesterday with the Water Collaborative, and I think as much as we're talking about lessons learned from Katrina this week, and we're reflecting on those things, every time I keep telling myself, I can't believe it's been 20 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years. Sometimes I mean that in a good way. Sometimes I mean that like, oh, it's been 20 years. And then sometimes I'm like, oh my God, it's been 20 years. So today we're gonna reflect on those 20 years. We're going to think about that, but knowing this great group of panelists that we have here today, we're also going to talk about what's next. We're also going to look forward, which I think is a really important part of the discussion. So, one of the things about where we have a panel in front, I guess, that I'm going to take a brief intermission, and then we're going to have our fireside chat after that. Alex described the activities that she would like folks to participate in. In the meantime, we certainly have plenty of food. I baked all those cookies myself this morning, so please kind of which one. And before we move further into the program, I do want to thank the Water Collaborative for letting us be a part of the NOLA Water Week. I want to thank Jessica and her team for taking on that initiative at NOLA Water Week. I want to thank Taproot Earth for letting us be a part of the really important discussions that they have organized for this week, throughout the week. I want to thank this absolutely beautiful facility for lending us their space this week. Had not been here before and hope to be back many times. I also want to personally thank 2 members of the MRD staff that really took every single detail of so many things this week that made it just so thoughtful and so considerate. So Sam Carter, she loves when I do things like this. If you don't know Sam, Sam does everything with intentions, and it is reflected in the panel and the outcome of today too. And Jordan Phillips also is, as a person who is, as myself, was not great at the attention to detail, I absolutely adore people like Jordan who think about that as well. So thank you for making all the things work today too. So without further ado, I want to introduce Eva Tesfaye from WW. I know she's going to moderate the panel today, and she's going to introduce our panelists. But thank you for being here today.
Let's want to come up here, take a seat. I'm Eva Tesfaye. I'm a coastal reporter for WWL and WRKF, which are NPR affiliate stations in fact in New Orleans. And today we're going to talk about coastal restoration. So, Hurricane Katrina was 20 years ago, and when 5 storm ripped through Louisiana, it exposed the work needed to properly maintain not only the hard infrastructure that protects us, the levees, the flood walls that protects the city, but also the need to restore the natural buffers we have in storms. So we have a great panel here to talk about those lessons we've learned as climate change and storms get more intense. And you'll hear about the importance of wetlands as storm protection, community organizing, and advocacy of coastal restoration, and of science-based decision-making protecting our infrastructure. So we have a great panel. To my left, we have Shelly Fayad. Shelly received her Bachelor of Science degree from Southern University in New Orleans in 1999. She started as a volunteer with the Fish and Wildlife Service at Southeast Louisiana Refuges. And 27 years later, she's now the deputy project leader of complex 3 refuges. Bayou Sauvage Urban, Bayou Touch, and Mondelez NWRs. Then we have Kai Wen. He is the co-executive director for Song Community Development Corporation, a nonprofit organization serving New Orleans East that works to improve the quality of life of residents through their justice work in health, climate, environment, food, education, housing, workforce, as well as culture and arts. Then we have Hilaire Dupine. She's the chairman of Citizens for One Greater New Orleans, a nonpartisan, volunteer-led citizens advocacy group that aims to be a voice for reform and renewal for the greater New Orleans and Louisiana. Citizens for One was founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Our group's first advocacy focus was the reform of the governance and the structure of the levy boards, which you might have been hearing a lot about in the news lately. And then last but not least, we have Charles Allen. He's the engagement director for the Audubon Delta unit of the National Audubon Society, where the entire focus of his work is on diversity, equity, and inclusion, by working to enhance Audubon's reach to underrepresented communities in the states of Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So we have a well-rounded panel here. So I'm going to start by just asking, Katrina has shaped this city, but it also how we approach coastal restoration. How has your personal and professional life been shaped by Katrina and what's followed with you?
Well, personally, longest story, and we have time for it. But, well, personally, I often say it's the worst and the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me, all at the same time. Professionally, it really reshaped the refuge. It showed what the refuge can do when it needs to do it. And that's what Bayou Sauvage Urban, which is located in New Orleans East. We're the farthest part of New Orleans East before you cross Lake Pontchartrain to the North Shore. You're passing, and you're on the interstate, you're passing through Bayou Sauvage Urban National Wildlife Refuge. And refuges and wetlands, especially wetlands, and you have them all around New Orleans and the state of Louisiana, they act like sponges and they absorb the water. So when Hurricane Katrina hit, yes, we did have some damage to levees around the refuge that needed to be repaired. But the refuge took on all of that water. There were areas in New Orleans East, there's a community right next to it that did not flood. They had a lot of wind damage. Yeah, I mean, you got winds blowing at close to 150 miles an hour. So yes, they had a lot of wind damage, but no flood because we did our job and we were right next to it. And if you have more areas like this and realize the value of those areas and how you can contribute, because that's just a small part. You know, like I said before, these wetlands are all around the city and all around the state. And if we restore those wetlands and let them do their job, we won't have personally as much damage as we did.
Guy?
Yeah, for me, I was a college student at the time, and I just remember really deciding, like, I'm gonna come back and, like, this is where I'll be. Like, I told my partner, I told my parents, you guys can move if you want, I'll be in New Orleans. I'd say professional, I mean, for me, it was just, like, really important to be here in the aftermath to, like, you know, be a part of the post-Katrina New Orleans as well. Professionally, I started in community development, and currently, for the past 15 years, as director. So yeah, after Katrina, I grew up in the Vietnamese community in New Orleans, very close to where Shelley works. After Katrina, there was a lot of talk about not coming back or not rebuilding that area of New Orleans, even though a lot of our community members have come back in large numbers, much faster than other areas of the city. And so there was a need for community organizing and need for community organizations to basically help make sure that our voices were heard in the redevelopment plan. And my work currently is direct directly related to that, those initial pushes. You know, we were doing reopening schools, forming a community health center, doing urban farming, a few other things that are directly from redevelopment after that time. So yeah, that's where we are today.
Super interesting. Blair. So New Orleans is my adopted hometown. I was a bit of a disaster follower in my early career. I moved to New York shortly after 9/11 to start my career in finance. And then I fell in love in New Orleans and moved here 6 years after Katrina. But I moved into a city that was had recently come off this reform, renew, rebuilding better. And in my attempt to meet people and grow my community and put down roots here, I ended up coming across an amazing group of women who had founded Citizens for One Greater New Orleans. At the time, they asked me to come in and join their education committee. They were very involved in all the efforts to improve the outcomes in public schools in New Orleans. And lo and behold, a few years into that, I was asked to take on the chair role of Citizens for One. They were involved because I wasn't there at the time in that initial reform of the levee limits. And as much as the wetlands should be the focus of this discussion because it's nature's and our first line of defense, of course, we relied on the levees and they failed us. And so to hear about an all volunteer citizen led advocacy group go to Baton Rouge after the storm, after the legislature refused to pass legislation and say, no, we need a better system of governance for our levees. We didn't have the belts and suspenders. We don't know if we could have found the failures in the levees because there really was no second check on the work of the Corps of the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's how it's affected both my personal and professional life because serving in this role, I get to interact with members across the community, lawmakers, policymakers, citizens. And so unfortunately, recently we've seen a backtrack of those initial reforms, which had worked pretty well for 19 years. And the current governor has decided to try to exhibit more control over the levee board again. And so we've been back in Baton Rouge in the last session, advocating to hold the line because all of that reform and renewal that came after the storm, it's important for us not to forget that we have the potential to flood catastrophically. And so we need to be alert every moment of every day and think about what we can do to make sure that that never happens again. Mm-hmm. Charles.
So personally, like a lot of us here, I lost everything. In fact, my mother lived just a few blocks down on North Dergeois. Her home was completely flooded. In fact, as I'm sitting here with you all today, I'm so nostalgic for being in this old church, St. Rose of Lima Church. My mother and I used to come here for midnight mass for several years. And so being in here is a very heart-tugging and nostalgic moment for me. Professionally, y'all, I was working at Tulane University prior to Katrina, where the focus of my work, I was one of the associate directors of the center. And the center was known as the Tulane Xavier Center for Bioenvironmental Research, where the lead director of our center, his whole work was in the area of pharmacology and environmental hormones. So we were all about focused on bringing research faculty together to go after big grants to focus on environmental endocrinology. In fact, I see in the audience here one of our old investigators enjoying his chicken sandwich, yes. But then Katrina hits. And so like a lot of us, my professional story changed, okay? Working at Tulane, like a lot of the old institutions back in the local schools, even those institutions were like, look, we're a part of New Orleans, we have to be part of this recovery story as well, remember? Remember all the student-based volunteerism that went on, okay? These institutions went after grants. In fact, we did, focused on how are you contributing to the remake, the rethinking, the rebuilding of such a quintessential, world-class city and community such as ours. And so professionally, my life changed in that direction. And then as Mary Rowe knows, sitting in the audience there, I was involved in my neighborhood association back then. Remember all the neighborhood associations, y'all? And how they had to be stood up, and they stood up to basically prove the viability of neighborhoods across the city. I know this rings some bells with y'all. And so personally, professionally, my life changed in so many ways, on so many levels. But then as I look around and I see Mary Rowe, I see Sam Carter, and I see Hushel and all of us, look at the silver linings, you might say, that have come together since all. And we just have to be reminded that out of disasters, there are silver linings. Yeah, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain that goes with it. But there are these friends that we make. And here we are today. And to your point, yes, we have to remind our governmental authorities and entities, we cannot backtrack. We cannot backtrack. We put too much work into getting a framework, a list of projects, a body of work that is science-driven, influenced by community, but it's influenced by real information. Okay, and that's the old scientism we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those stories, and I think it just shows like how diverse and multifaceted recovery is and has to be, and how it's still ongoing. And so let's start talking about weapons. So this question is first for Shelley. How have we come to better understand the role of wetlands in protecting communities from hurricanes since Katrina? And if you could maybe talk about, some of the reasons why hurricanes offer that protection from storms. Like what scientifically is going on?
Okay, like I was saying earlier, when you learn what wetlands do, and that starts, we do a lot of environmental education and we outreach to kids because y'all not listening. So, and this is how we got to where we are. Okay, so we start with the kids, we start telling them, and they are gonna bug you. And they're going to tell you, and they are going to refuse to do things or want to do things. We start with them and educating them. And then once they learn, at one time I worked for, at that time, it was the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation. Now it's the Pontchartrain Conservancy. That's aging me a little bit, yes. But, I used to take kids on field trips. We follow a bucket of water in the city of New Orleans. And we would follow that bucket. They would learn, oh, that's what these pumping stations do. Okay? Then they pump it out to Lake Pontchartrain. Oh, and once you tie it to something we all love as food, then the kids get it, like start going on, stuff like that. So, and that's the thing that we're trying to do now is really educate not only kids, because, we've learned that some folks, mainly younger folks, are interested also. So they come out and they're like, well, how can I help? What can I do? When you take a group out and you do a planting and then you bring them back and say, see, that's what you did. And this is what it does. So it's all about education, really, and just and getting you guys to just realize, and even the plants we have. Look at these cypress trees. Think about a cypress tree. They're all in the mark, all on the outside. And what it does, it sends all the roots, these exposed knees, sends them out far and wide. Those knees will break the storm cells. That's the first line, is the cypress tree roots that are exposed, those knees, and they break that storm surge. And then the tree breaks that storm surge. You can't just knock over a cypress tree. It's made to bend with the wind. You know, so if you just think about some of the things that's naturally growing out here, let's make more of it and put it out there. You know, just like plant trees at your house. Trees, I was so excited to see a billboard in New Orleans saying how much water trees absorb. I don't know who put it up because I was driving. But I caught it and I was excited to see that. That's education. Goes back to education. Trees absorb water. Start in your neighborhood. Plant some trees. You know, so that's one thing that's going to help us. With storm, with the rain, we're more concerned with rain than we are with hurricanes. If you look about it, it start raining, everybody gets nervous. You know, everybody's like, "Whoa, is it going to blow?" You know, let's plant some trees and they'll absorb that water. You won't have to be as nervous when it rains. You know, so it's not only hurricanes, but the water, because that's what got us, was the water. People think about the storm and all that. It was the water. It was all the water.
Yeah, and I'm not remembering the specific percentage right now, but we lost a ton of our tree canopy during Katrina, and we haven't fully recovered that. And there's some groups like Soul.
Yes, so NOAA is trying to, and they are, restoring the tree canopy one neighborhood at a time. And they focus on different neighborhoods. I worked with them in the Ninth Ward, we planted trees over there, and in the Gentilly area, we did that. So yes, we lost a lot of our canopy, and we need to bring it back.
Blair, I'm curious, for you as someone who focuses more on the hard infrastructure side of things, how do you think about these kinds of natural solutions in relation to our levee system?
Yeah, so obviously we know that the coast is eroding at an alarming rate. We know we're losing our wetlands. And so while we have to pursue these longer term projects to restore them, and unfortunately we're going in the wrong direction right now with the cancellation of the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, which by the way, spent over $500 million of our DP money and then was canceled. So it's a complete waste of money. Just want everybody to be aware of that. We have to use our levees right now, and probably always for certain events. And the levees are what failed us. And the levee boards, before reform, were disjointed. So each parish had a different organization overseeing the same levees. And so nothing changed at the parish line as far as the water is concerned, but we had different governance structures. The boards overseeing those organizations were basically hand-selected by the governor. And there was a lot of enriching of themselves and not a lot of oversight and maintenance of our flood protection assets. And that is why it's so important to understand that we're slipping back into that, unfortunately, right now. The reforms unified the levees into one authority on the east side of the river, one on the west, ensured that engineers who actually know how the levees work were on those boards, and ensured that they were not political appointees, trying to take as much politics out of the public body as possible. What we have now is the reintroduction of politics. That's a scary situation when what we need is the men and women who work and close the floodgates and inspect the levees, focused every single day on how can we improve these systems. Instead, they're wondering, am I going to be fired because the governor's guy has it out for me? I can't even speak publicly that's not a good situation for us to be in, and that's why it's so important for the public to understand what's going on there. And we can get to the details later, but while we are restoring and must restore the coast and our wetlands as our first line of defense and nature's best line of defense, we have to rely on those levees if and when the next storm, and it will come, the next big storm, like the big storm surge. Rain is another matter, and I'm laughing because I remember my first downpour. I didn't know which way was up. And the water was coming over the roof of my Honda Accord, and I said, oh, I'm gonna be on the news, I'm gonna be on the top of my car. And I was scared to drive for at least 2 years after that, so, that feeling is real.
Yeah, and obviously, we're also seeing, more extreme weather generally with climate change. And Blair, you mentioned the Mid-Barrett Area sediment diversion getting canceled. So that was the state's largest coastal restoration project. It was supposed to be the cornerstone of the coastal master plan. It had decades of science and planning behind it. It was canceled earlier this year. The idea behind it was to use the river to build more wetlands by diverting water carrying sediment into Barrett Area Bay. So this question is for anybody who has thoughts on this. Given that that project has been canceled, where do you think we go from here in terms of the types of coastal restoration projects we do moving forward and how we approach those in the future? Like Charles wants to say something.
We're gonna get real here, okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So, here's what we need to do, folks. The democracy is failing us, okay? It is failing us. The way we get this project and that framework and that way of thinking back on track is at the ballot box. Amen? Let's get some applause on that. Because this is where the rubber really meets the road. The democracy is failing us right now. 20 years later, we should be much further along. And that project concept, and then the subsequent one, the Mid-Breton, okay? And perhaps some other subsequent ones should be implemented. We will never have, during any given year, the luxury of saying, oh, we're going to check out if having hurricane season this year. We're not going to do that. No, we never have that luxury. And right now, we are moving into the peak season of this year's hurricane season, where we're all sitting on pins and needles and praying that nothing comes our way. We need to be doing better than that, and we know we can, okay? We got on track, we got on the right track, of course, shortly after Katrina and Rita. Remember, our friends to the west of us always remind us, Rita hit also just about a month after Katrina. And the lower nine flooded again during Rita. At the ballot box, we got to take back the democracy again, get the foolish thinking out of our governmental entities, put us back on track where science and real information is driving our work and not stupid politics. Okay? Amen? Amen. We have to do this. We have to, yeah, come on, applaud, because we have to do this. We need that noise and we need that chorus to really resound from here on out. We're about to go into a critical year of midterm elections. I'm going from granular to large scale, okay? Because we need change on a lot of levels. Yes, in Baton Rouge for sure. We've got to get back on track. And so, yeah, at the ballot box, we got to take back the democracy.
Amen. And I would just add to that you as a citizen have the power to engage with your elected officials. You can call them, you can speak to them, you can ask to speak to them, you can ask to tell them what matters to you. And then you can also collectively through Citizens for One or other advocacy organizations, the people's voice matters. We just need to speak up.
Does anybody else want to answer that question?
I would just say that, yeah, unfortunately with the cancellation, but I think either way, it wasn't ever going to be the only way we can restore the coast. And for me, speaking on a more local level here in New Orleans, like we can focus a lot more or try to continue to push for more local mitigation, green infrastructure, making sure planting more trees like Shelley was mentioning. And just continuing building that trust with community members going forward. So those things don't happen again.
Really good point.
Yeah, I agree too. I do. Carefully, Angie, especially, yes, back to Blair, what you were saying is so true about reach out to your congressman, reach out to your senators. It works. I saw it work. I saw that action get, or that an action like that send hundreds of thousands of dollars to our office to do what that one person asked. One person. One person. But you gotta know how to do it. He kept complaining to me, and I'm like, this is not how you do it. I'll complain to them too. But that's not how you do it. You voted for these people. Call them. Get your money's worth. Okay? He called, he was directly in a certain way to call. One thing led to another. Uh, the senator's office, one of their staffers came to visit. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. Oh, yeah, we see the problem. Okay. Boom. Just like that. So it works. It works. It works.
Yeah, it's nice to give them someone to go inside. So my next question, starting with Kai, what role do you think communities should play in shaping coastal restoration and disaster planning efforts? And could you give some examples that you've seen of your community really getting involved?
Yeah, I think in general, I think we need to consider folks that are residents as like experts and their own scientists as well. Obviously, we need the technical, but at the same time, you have to make sure that community voices are involved and throughout the whole process, and not just we've already decided this is what's going to go up. So we just do a lip service, public comment or whatever. As far as examples, I'd say, like I said, mentioned earlier, I'm more on the local urban side, but post-Katrina, I'll give a few examples. One from post-Katrina, we had a lot of community organizing, making sure people understood that we were here. And there was a lot of first-time civic engagement from a lot of folks. One, to be able to let people know that we were back and rebuilding. But also we had a landfill situation with environmental justice, making sure that we weren't getting toxic debris or chemicals dumped near our community. More recently, we've been doing community education around just like urban water and how, like Shelley was mentioning, taking a bucket and seeing where that water goes, how it affects each neighborhood. And we've been trying to get folks together, multi-generational, cross-cultural cohorts to really lead design to mitigate some of these things. So we've worked with community members to design out rain gardens, bioswales, planting, tree plantings across some of the bayous in our neighborhoods. 'Cause we're always in the neighborhood I grew up in, especially we're completely surrounded by water. So yeah, just been trying to really have a community-led discussion, but also design as well.
Charles, part of your work is reaching out to underrepresented communities. Do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Within the last few years, the National Audubon Society, where I work, we've been successful at helping to establish an Audubon campus chapter at Xavier University. Okay? And within the last few years, that chapter worked with us within the MRD Coalition and our colleagues at the CPRA to host a couple of master planning meetings around coastal restoration on their campus, okay? And it was beautiful, you all, to talk to the students during the planning and the efforts leading up to those meetings, because they were a little bit shy in the beginning, but then once they saw that first meeting happen, they were like, oh, wow, this is how we do it. I'm like, yeah, this is how we do it. And I said, you're the next generation of environmental advocates, environmental lawyers, you name it. But you're the ones, you're going to be driving this work. So please see yourself in this work, okay? By that second meeting, more students turned out. And so I bring that up to say, that's an example of how we're doing this work at an HBCU, historically Black college and university, Xavier University, which is celebrating 100 years this year. And we're engaging not only African-American students and others from the local area, but these students, as we know, come from around the country. And they have told us, that, their advisors and others, how they take back the work to whatever communities they come from. So it's a way of just, again, cultivating the next generation in this regard and helping to replicate that work. And look, I impress on them as well. Remember your civic engagement and the work in the democracy. Vote. Study the issues leading up to election day. Don't wait until election day to get into the box and figure out, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. No, study the issues before. I'll help you in studying. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, even you, Shelley, talked about this really well. You brought up kind of engaging the young people and the next generation. I think that's interesting given that in a lot of communities in Louisiana, especially along the coast, we see a lot of young people leaving and a lot of those coasts start aging because older people tend not to move as much. So if we can, get those young people on board, maybe we can also deal with that problem. So this question is for each person. If you could speak directly to perfect. If you could speak directly to the next generation of Gulf Coast residents, what would you want them to know about their relationship to land and water? We can start with Charles, right? Yeah.
I think about how my maternal grandfather, who was a dentist, he was a Renaissance man, you all. His name was Dr. Robert Fields years ago. And while he worked in dentistry, he was the first person who got me to appreciate the environment. Fishing trips we would take, he would impart on me the importance of, don't litter, don't pollute, don't throw that in the water. That's going to harm the fish, birds, you name it. And so little lessons like that, if we can just share them with, the youth and frankly, even some adults, okay? We all need to be reminded every now and then of those basic concepts around the environment and environmentalism, okay? We all have it in us, okay? If you have lived in New Orleans and in this region long enough, you can't help but see how we are all so inextricably tied to this environment. Amen? The food, the music, you name it, okay? So it's endless. We just every now and then need something to just kind of remind us of the importance of it, And it starts at a very granular level, it works its way out. I see the nod, the heads nodding. I know y'all feel what I'm saying, okay?
As a mom of an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, I do think a lot about what this land will be for them. And that's a heavy burden. So I think we need to commit to them that we're going to look at this today. We're not just going to hand it off to you. This looming disaster that we can all see. It's not easy. But I would say that learning the skill of advocacy, which everyone can, is very beneficial. I've sat in public meetings where people just go to complain. That's not helpful. Let's learn how to become effective members of our democracy and to enact change. You can complain amongst your friends at home later, but when you go to engage with your elected officials who work for you, become informed, learn how to become an effective advocate. But I would just throw that back on the adults and say, we owe it to them because there's not enough time. We got to start now.
I would say a couple of things. One is, even though we're in New Orleans, we're a lot closer to the water than we think. I think, it's not just a, Alma emergency cures issue. I think if you go on Winter Slidell from New Orleans East, you'll see how much water is around us. So it is very much a local issue. Two is, I guess, when we talk about restoration, restoring land or whatever, it's not just the land, it's like the land represents, food, culture, music, all of that. And we really do need to do as much as we can to preserve that culture.
Well, thank you, Deb, for something else. Yeah, I mean, it's just like everybody said, you know, all things are connected, all of them. I often say we have to learn how to live with water. Because like I said, we're surrounded by it. You either by the lake or the river. We all connect. I mean, I can remember parents giving directions like lakeside, riverside. So we need to learn how to live with water, and realize how much it ties to everything else and how important it is, how it ties to the habitat and what it means to us, the food, the culture, our way of life. Y'all want to give this up? Nobody wants to leave it. That's why we keep coming back. Because we don't want to leave this. We like it's too good here. It is too good here. We don't want to leave this. Other people move it. Why? Because they're like, oh, y'all have too much fun. I want some fun. But I mean, and do it in a way that you can relate to. I mean, I try to recruit people into this, especially students. I have interns all the time. You will see, they're not with me today, but I usually have interns hanging around trying to show them something. Are they all going to go into this? Maybe, maybe not. I had one that she tried her best. She was allergic to everything outside and had an EpiPen in her back pocket all the time, which made me nervous. Like, But she decided to go into environmental law. I said, thank you, because I need that. I need those that not only put the plants in the ground, plant Spartina or stuff, or cypress tree, or all the trees, not just that one. But I also need those folks that say, I don't do outside, but I will go and fight for you. I will call that senator. I will call that representative. I will go to Washington. We need those people too. Okay? So I know not every day is for everybody, and it's understandable, and I'm good with it. But realize the role you play, so that you play some role.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the last question. So it's a two-part. What's something in the last 20 years that made you hopeful for South Louisiana? And what do you hope to see in the next 20 years for restoration and protection? And that question is for everybody. So whoever wants to go first.
What I have seen in the last 20 years is more of an awareness. More, and that Katrina will make you aware, not in the head, make you aware of everything. But there seems to be more of an awareness on all levels, not just, with kids or with young, because we drill it into kids, but even other folks. I mean, I did 20 years ago, people were like, what? Wait, you work in the environment? They got people that do that? Yeah. It was just not that hurt. So that's what I'm seeing change. And that is also my hope, also that it continues, that more people wake up, and see what needs to be done and want to play their part, whatever part.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was great to see was that a lot of the solutions were community-led, especially right after Katrina. I think a lot of folks have a lot of complaints about government and the response time from structure, infrastructure, and things like that. But out of necessity, a lot of people have to, a lot of communities have to help themselves out and rebuild on their own. And so I think a lot of community leaders came out of that, a lot of organizations that are still doing a lot of good work. And I say for the future, yeah, continue that. As Shelley said, I do think there's a lot more awareness of stormwater management, environmental climate issues, subsidence, all that. And so just continue to work towards that, and just a little bit more emphasis on not just the really big structural mitigations, but maybe more community focus as well.
We didn't solve all of our problems, not even close, but we made a lot of progress in the last 20 years. We got that levy reform in place. We went from 7 property tax assessors in New Orleans to 1. Some people still complain about that, but that's a much cheaper and fairer system for everybody here. We've made improvements on the outcomes of the kids in our schools. We got a lot of work to do there, but we made real progress. But now we're at a point of apathy and we need to re-engage. And so I would love to see, and I hope we don't need another disaster to spark this, I would love to see another resurgence of citizen engagement, because when you have all of the communities come together and figure out what all of us want and not live in our silos, we all have our own individual communities, but that disaster brought everyone together. And I hope to see more of that, because we got a lot more work to do. So we've had our little rest. Let's get back to it, because we can make a lot of changes and we can make a lot of improvements.
Yeah, I can't amen enough these points that have been made, because again, I can appreciate the level of awareness, the savviness that not just this New Orleans area, but folks along Southern Louisiana have gained from the last 20 years, okay? Everybody pretty much has a sense of, are you on high ground or not? Where are you building your home, Are you elevating? What's the nearest wetlands restoration project near you? There's a sadness here that's just remarkable. But we have, along the way, taken our foot off the pedal, okay? And we've let certain folks and crazy thinking creep back into our government, and it is screwing us over big time, okay? And like I said before, we will never have that luxury of saying, we're not going to do that thing called hurricane season shit. We're not doing it. In fact, let's just check out of that for a couple of years. No, we never have that luxury. And then there's the peak season. We're sitting on pins and needles and we're praying for the cold front to blow through to cool the waters down. Man, we can do better than that. We can do better than that. So we need to see a sea change, politically speaking. Am I right? We have to demand it, I am serious as a heart attack. 20 years, 2 decades. That's essentially a generation that has gone by, a generation of time. And it happens that way. Don't we know examples of how every 20 to 25 years, people's sensibilities start to change? We're witnessing it right now. We have to take democracy. Yeah, because it's really. But between Katrina and Betsy, it's that same right?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for those thoughts. And we have a little bit of time, so I want to open it up to any audience questions. And you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you. You can shout out and I'll repeat it into the mic.
Don't be shy.
Does your organization do advocacy training, or where is that?
The question was, does your organization do advocacy training?
We have in the past. If there's an interest, we could do that again. So happy to connect with you and talk about it. Yeah. We can go with the question.
Can someone explain more about the saltwater treatment? Why the project was bigger, and more about that, just so that
So your question was about the sediment diversion that we were talking about earlier, the
Yeah.
Barrett area.
Does anybody, I could also, I could probably,
Let go. I was in Let Go. There
yeah,
are many versions of that. I was in Let Go. But I'll start by saying this. There have been for a number of years, and I'm looking at my colleague Simone and others who I know could also chime in on this. And I point out Simone because she's from Southwest Louisiana, in the central part of the state. We all know how local thinking at times has some truism to it, but we also have at times conspiratorial feelings about life, okay? And a lot of times, as we know, in life and in politics, the sector or the subsector of the population that makes the most noise gets what they want, okay? But there are still legitimate concerns on the part of a number of folks who, have grave issues and pause and concern about the sediment diversion concept, how it will change the regime of water, blah, 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 blah. Yes, that is true, which is why a number of us who work in the environmental realm have said, look, folks in Baton Rouge, the political leaders, their concerns are legitimate. Make certain that we have the resources to address their concerns. Am I right or wrong? Okay. But certain politicals have got in and have done away with that type of thinking and that sensibility, and they're all about now, well, let's change course, okay, to please and appease them and take our eyes off the bigger picture. That's not smart. But we know many examples like that in politics. The group that makes the most noise will sometimes see the change that they want to see, right? But you know what? We have to be more responsible for our people. Let me just tell you, in my own family, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, I have certain family members who may not understand things the way I do. I look at myself as being the one who needs to sit with them, talk to them, and help them to make some sense out of a situation. We have to do that. We're related to a lot of those folks who have had the grave concerns about the sediment diversion concept. We got to go grab our relatives and our people and say, look, let's do this the right way. Let me help you understand where I'm coming from. And I also want to understand where you're coming from too, right? We don't want anyone to be shut up. But again, we've got to get back on track. We've got to get back on track and let science and real data and real information and not the discrediting of all of that drive what we do. And does that resonate with folks in here? And if anybody feels like they can explain it better, the mic is yours, all right?
I could also just give more information about what the project was and give you that context. So the Mid-Barataria sediment diversions is something that we've seen on the river. We've also seen kind of natural crevasses form where basically the river kind of pushes through these like walls and fresh water will go into other areas and that fresh water carries sediment, which deposits and then eventually that builds up into land. It takes a really, really long time. So this was going to be like the largest diversion we had. It was going to bring fresh water into Barataria Bay, which has experienced a lot of land loss and is now like a very salty area, which makes it a great place for oysters to thrive. So part of what Charles was referring to is people, some people who are against it, the oyster net in Barataria Bay were very much against that project because it would have wiped out their oyster populations. It would have had to there was also some concerns about flooding, but really the reason it got canceled is over the past year, the governor and his appointee of CBRA were kind of stalling the project. It was already a little bit stalled, but they ordered a pause on construction. They wrote to the Army Corps, and the Army Corps ended up withdrawing the permit. And then eventually they just canceled it. And some of the reasons they gave was ongoing lawsuits. There were some lawsuits from Blackman's Parish. They said it was bleeding money, that's a little bit more debatable since the money did come from BP and that was already set aside. And I'm forgetting their third reason.
Areas that they were oystering.
And the regime of these boards, that changed a lot.
So, yeah.
I think it's tied to historic, like, tradition.
We gotta help the family. Be clear.
Did you had a question for it, yeah?
Yeah, I wanted to know if maybe Blair could further explain the changes in the levy authority board from the recent legislative session and the implications of the changes.
Yeah, so the question was if Blair could explain the recent changes to the levy board in the recent legislative session, which actually didn't change all that much, right?
So in 2024, the legislature passed a bill that allowed the governor to self-select the presidents of 150 state boards, and that included the levy boards. And so before the session even started, the governor had handpicked a president who had just come onto the board. So imagine coming onto an organization that you are not familiar with and immediately being the president of the board. That was the situation. It went very poorly. A lot of employees were fired, resigned, or left for a lot of reasons. 4 board members resigned in protest of that presidency. So originally, Representative Jacob Rowe in Belchase had filed a bill on behalf of the governor's office that would remove the process of an independent nominating committee. This committee would review applications for people who wanted to serve on the board and make sure that they had met the qualifications, enough people with civil engineering backgrounds and other professions, and that they lived in the area or didn't, depending on the specifications of the law. A lot of groups pushed back against doing away completely with the nominating process, and that was successful advocacy. And so the nominating committee is intact. There were some changes made that modernized the system of nominations. So CPRA has a member now that sits on the nominating committee and serves as sort of the organizer and the secretary, although the nominating committee is still allowed to select its own president. It changed a little bit of the composition of the board. We went from a minimum of 5 of 9 on the East Banking engineers to 4, but replaced that with another profession. And it did loosen up the geographic requirements so that if there is a qualified person who doesn't live in East Jefferson, Orleans, or St. Bernard who wants to serve on that board, there's more opportunity for that. It also allows the nominating committee members to meet via Zoom because they don't all live in the area. So those changes were made. It also shortened the amount of time that the nominating committee has to send names up to the governor. Because what they do is they send 2 names up to the governor for each position, and the governor appoints from that. If there's an unexpected vacancy, that time frame went from 4 months to 3 months, which probably makes sense. You don't want to have a vacancy on the board for that long. So those are the changes that were made. We were advocating to also allow boards on both the East and the West Bank to select their own president, basically neutralizing that political influence that's been going on. And you probably read this summer that board president was removed by the governor, and then another brand new member of the board has been appointed by the governor to be the president, with, trying to get up to speed, but no institutional knowledge of the organization. Things seem to be moving in a right direction, but the governance problem has not been solved, which is those board commissioners should elect their own president. It should be someone that they trust to lead their board. They do. So there are now 7 of the 9 positions have been filled. The nominating committee has put forward some names that the governor has now appointed. The governor did appoint a name that was not sent by the nominating committee. That seems to have been a mistake, and that member has resigned and will reapply. If any of you are interested, go to the SlipFit East website. They are asking for applications for members who, in 2 positions. One is a professional, not an engineer, in Orleans. The other one, I believe, has to live outside of the authority district. But if you know anyone who is qualified, you have time to submit applications for both of those vacancies. Yeah, this story is changing so fast. I actually did not know that member had resigned, so that's a good thing for me to know. And if you're interested, I'm actually coming out with a story on this next week, and then Alex Lovin over at the Times-Picayune has really covered the city incrementally really well. So if you're interested in seeing, because there is so much that happened. Like Blair just scratched the surface. Honestly, it's just like constant change.
Sheila's name because I think you can Google Alex, no, Lubin, AWX, LUBBEN, and he has 8 different articles all related to this and points out the problems, still the problem that we're facing, we are still facing problems.
I'm gonna list you one more question, and I'll go to you.
Shelley, you said what have been the 3 magic words here for at least the last 12 years, living with water. So in system science, we talk about systems being locked in or people being locked into systems, right? And what has to be unlocked to allow a thing to happen. So what still has to be unlocked in this area to allow us to live with water? For all of you, but especially you.
Only you, Shelley.
Well, one thing that has to be unlocked is our minds, okay? You have to be open to stuff. You know, and some things we're not gonna get rid of. We're not gonna get rid of levees, especially in certain parts of the city. You're not gonna get rid of that stuff. But you have to be open and not think the way you used to. You know, this is not our grandfather's New Orleans, our grandmother's New Orleans anymore. You know, this is our New Orleans, and we determine our collective fate. So, yeah, we have to be open to the ideas, open, like Charles was saying, listen to sound science, you know, and also speak up. I mean, if you've been around for a while, like me, and you see things, you know, speak up. Say, no, this wasn't always like this. This street didn't always flood till y'all resurfaced it. And I see that so often around the world, you know. So speak up, say something.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, can I get a round of applause for this great panel? Thank you
Eva,
all.
thank you. What a great job facilitating that discussion. Thank you to each of the panelists for being here today, but really for what you do every day. Thank you for all those moments we don't see. I'm sure all those late nights, all those early mornings in your neighborhood. Thank you for that. We are going to have just a brief intermission right now. There's certainly some food still available. Please see Alex's table for her project, for our project here. It's a different way for us to bring a different element into this discussion. And then please stick around for Megan and Krista. I promise you will want to eavesdrop on that conversation too. So we'll be back in less than 5 minutes. Thank you. Y'all, just to explain the project a little bit for those who aren't here before, if that conversation sparked any hopes or prayers for the coast that you want to let us know about, please come over here to the table and let us know. Yes. Actually, you have to do something.
community engagement part of that. And that was very refreshing. And I appreciate that. And I think your work lives on there, and they have taken so many steps forward there, and appreciate that. Megan and I are old panelist partners. We go way back. I'm a little jealous I wasn't asked to be part of this conversation. We oftentimes get to sit next to each other several times. We've had that opportunity. And she is a wonderful complement to the work that we do, focusing in New Orleans and that idea of where that bucket of water goes. So without further ado, I'll let you two take over the conversation. How's everybody doing? Yeah, I got some feedback. Okay, yeah. As Simone mentioned, Meg and I actually just met yesterday. I don't know how we haven't met yet. We're going to start this conversation the same way we started our conversation yesterday, which is we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. So, Megan, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start out if you could. If you would tell us about yourself, what you do, and yeah, get us kicked off.
Sure. Hello. My name is Megan Williams. I'm the Urban Water Program Administrator for the Office of Resilience and Sustainability. But by training, I'm a civil engineer, civil and environmental engineer. I have a master's degree in civil engineering with concentration in water resources. I've been with the city for 9 years, but I've been in the, somebody cut me off. Oh, there we go. I've been in the engineering world for a little bit over a decade. So my work is always focused on drainage and roadways, and within the last decade, it has shifted to less traditional on the green infrastructure side. So I've been with the Resilience Office for the last 3, and I was with the Department of Public Works before. But this work is super special. You know, I was born and raised here. My family's been here for many, many years, many generations. So all of the work that we do, as well as the work that Chris is going to talk about, is super important to who we are as a city, to who our identity is, and who it will continue to develop to be. Your turn.
My turn. All right, thank you. Yeah, so Krista Jankowski, and I am, my academic background is in climate science and coastal geoscience, which is a little unique for someone who was actually born and raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But I've been here in South Louisiana for the last 15 years. I came down here to study at Tulane, got my PhD at Tulane. And that was really looking at how wetlands respond to sea level rise and changes over time, and what we can learn about that, looking at it from different observational windows of time. And following that, I moved to working for the state of Louisiana at the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority. So I moved to Baton Rouge for about 6 years. And while I was there, I helped to manage the development of the 2023 master plan, as Simone mentioned, and was involved in a lot of different aspects of that. So there's the community engagement side, really working on content development for the master plan. How are we talking about the issues that we have in the state? How are we talking about coastal restoration? As well as, you know, how are we making that science accessible to people so that they can really understand the scale of the problem and feel like they're informed and able to make decisions, as well as also on the technical side, looking at climate scenarios that we're used in our predictive modeling, thinking about things like subsidence or how the land is moving downward while the water is moving up, and what are we going to do about that, how that compounds our problems. So I worked on that plan. And then recently, I have moved over to the private sector, and I'm working for a company where I'm working still as a planner in kind of taking the experience that I've had here in the state of Louisiana to try to kind of move that into conversations in other parts of the country. So currently working with a lot of different local and state governments who really look to the state of Louisiana and look to you know, that science-driven and you know, people informed, community-informed coastal master plan that we've worked on and had iterations over the years. A lot of folks around the country look at us as a leader and as that as an example. And so getting the chance to work on those types of projects elsewhere, currently in Virginia and Florida, and things like that. So that's a little bit about me. I think we wanted to start this conversation. I know we talked yesterday.
And we're thinking through, what are the important things to talk about at this moment when we're thinking about 20 years after Katrina, and the word resilience came up while we were talking. And I know that, there are conversations that are had about, the city being resilient, about the infrastructure being resilient, but also about the people of New Orleans and being resilient, and that can, hit people's ears in a different way, depending on what you think about that terminology. I was curious, as someone who was born and raised here and who works in the field that you work in, how's that word resilience giving you today, and this week as we're kind of thinking about the treatment, where it was coming from?
It's very conflicting, especially because I work for the resilience office. But, I'm sure throughout this week, you'll probably hear the word resilience a million times in a million different ways and who it's referring to. And I think one of the things that's hard is and why it could be so triggering is that resilience is not a choice for us. It is a necessity. We have had to be resilient so often, and it when it's as overused as it is, over the last 20 years, really since Katrina, it loses some of its oomph, I think, for a lot of us, and it gets watered down. Excuse me. But it gets very watered down, and it's supposed to be a reflection of strength and this ability to sort of bounce back, and it's so hard to keep using that word when, to Charles's point earlier, we still have a long way to go. We've made a lot of progress, and sometimes it feels like we sort of fall in this purgatory almost of progress. So sure, we're a resilient city, but it's because we have to be. And it's one of the things that I love and is so ingrained in our identity. But I feel like sometimes it's almost used maybe as a little bit of a slap in the face a little bit, if I'm being real honest. And this is gonna be a very honest conversation, y'all, so we might say some things that are not the most politically correct, but it feels like people are telling us we have to be resilient rather than us choosing to be resilient and return to what we know we are. So it's hard, and it'll be triggering for a lot of people this week. Katrina is such an individualized experience for all of us. For my colleagues in the room that were here, I was a kid, I was in high school when it happened. It's so formative to who we are, not only in our career, but who we are as people. And it's such a defining moment and such a critical point in shaping who we are and who we've become. And to just have that word resilience thrown at us, I think it's maybe lost a little bit of its meaning. And I think now, especially at the anniversary of Katrina, it's really time for us to sort of rethink how we talk about the next 20 years.
Yeah, no, I think that, I've heard a lot of those conversations and a lot of folks talking about how it almost feels like we don't have to worry about them. They're resilient, right? New Orleans are resilient, they'll be fine. So yeah, no, that echoes a lot of what I've had conversations with folks about. I'm sitting here thinking about the panel that was just up here, and we had folks talking about all the different ways that we might approach sort of avoiding flooding or being prepared for hurricanes and storm surge and those types of things. I know Shelley was talking about the wetlands and the importance of that, how, protecting the city and acting as a buffer for storm surge coming in. And then we were talking about, local projects, and Kai was talking about, the sort of green infrastructure at the very local level in neighborhoods, and we obviously have programs at the state level. I'm wondering, people talk about these multiple lines of defense, and they're talking about, both nature-based and sort of that traditional gray infrastructure, levees, pumps, and obviously working for the city of New Orleans, what you do. I'm interested to hear your take on both the green infrastructure, the traditional gray infrastructure, and kind of what that multiple lines of defense is looking like today.
Yeah, so, and then I'll let you talk about the piece outside of the levee system, but Shelley mentioned it earlier. We're not getting rid of levees. It's not happening. And I think part of where we land with this multiple lines of defense is combining this sort of green infrastructure, these nature-based solutions with the traditional gray. I'm an engineer, so I'm going to advocate for infrastructure all of my life. But what that infrastructure looks like is certainly changing. So, I'm gonna let you talk about the coastal side, but, when you go to other places along the Gulf Coast, especially Florida, you hear about mangroves and how they can sort of start to absorb some of the energy from storm surges. That's not quite as much of an immediate threat. And to Shelley's point also earlier is our big threat right now is rainfall from a Tuesday afternoon storm. So we have really started to integrate the different types of infrastructure with one another. We've taken notes from, the Dutch and how they live with water, and you heard a couple of folks say that earlier. And living with water is also so integral to every part of our being. And it's just, where we are now with our infrastructure and its multiple lines of defense is kind of switching from water as, this big scary looming thing to can we use it as an asset, and can we integrate it a little bit more into our lives? So, because we can't get rid of the levee system, we have to pump all of our water out, which means we need large drainage, which means we need updated pump stations. But we also have to make sure that that's not harming our coastal processes. We pump all of the water in the city out to Lake Pontchartrain, and, there's a preservation that needs to happen there, and that's where folks like the Pontchartrain Conservancy come in. So, what happens interior to the levee system, though, is because we have so much water in the drain, we have to get somewhere to go before it gets to the pump stations. We're a 300-year-old city with pumps that were installed, and someone's still in operation from 300 years ago. So, it's an incredibly large lift to, upgrade these pump stations. So we have to find ways to kind of help out the pump stations a little bit. And that's where some of the green infrastructure and nature-based solutions go. It's detaining water as close to where it falls as possible. So basically giving the water its own little swimming pool to hang out in before it gets to the system, because not only do we see the aging infrastructure in our pump stations, it's such a high energy demand as well. They use natural gas a lot of the time in our pump stations as well. So we have to find a way to lessen the burden of what the pump stations are being asked to do at a given moment. So in harmony with what's happening beyond the flood wall, we have to make sure that we're not putting so much water at any given time that it's changing the water quality, that, we're moving sediment around because of, such a high volume of water moving at any given time. So we have to work with all of our areas of infrastructure to make sure there is a harmony between all of them. They cannot exist in a vacuum. But I'll let you talk a little bit more about the coastal processes.
Yeah, I think when I was working for the state, oftentimes would invoke this multiple lines of defense. And over the past 20 years, so for those who aren't as familiar with the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, it's a state agency that was stood up after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005 to really serve as a centralized point of contact to collaborate with federal entities who are coming in for recovery and coming in to work with the state, but also to sort of concentrate a lot of the effort and thinking that was scattered around different state agencies to really focus on the coastal zone and what was going on there, and to think about restoration and risk reduction in tandem. So how those things work together and not in silos. And since really around 2007, that agency and the state has been putting literally billions of dollars into putting coastal restoration projects. So that's things like marsh creation, marsh nourishment, so helping those marshes and wetlands that are outside of the city and across the state to maintain their elevation so that they're not overtopped by rising sea levels, to make sure that they can still provide all the system services and be habitat for, shrimp and fish that we like to have around and keep around, but also looking at, helping to support and maintain levee systems and putting new levees onto the landscape, thinking, we have, obviously here we have the large levee system around the city, but in other parts of the state, if you go down towards where Simone comes from, right? We're looking at putting out other levee systems like the Morgan's River Bell system and things like that. And so I did
have some notes on numbers because I can't keep numbers in my head. So I can just mention that as of 2023, when that coastal master plan came out, the state had implemented over, or had completed over 150 projects across the state, ranging from different restoration and protection or risk reduction projects. And that really, I think what's important over the last few years is that the state has learned how to sort of switch from consistently being in a reactive mode to being more proactive in the restoration and in the risk reduction work that's being done. And a lot of that is because of the coastal program and thinking through how can we plan ahead. We have this master plan updated every 6 years. How can we keep the best available science coming into that planning? How can we account for the work that we've done and make sure that what we do next is supporting that or is enhancing the benefit we're getting from those projects, not working at cross purposes, right? We don't want to invest in things that aren't going to work together. And also thinking about how do we fund that work, because in Louisiana, in New Orleans, just like everywhere else, money is, always the hardest to come by when you're trying to make things happen. Really finding opportunities to plan, get projects through feasibility, engineering, and design, so that when funding does come available, when there is maybe an influx of money from an awful event like the BP oil spill, that money then gets used and directed towards the work that will help that system that was harmed, right? And so the state has been working and has a history of over the past few decades of really investing that money, looking at state surplus funds to invest that money. And so I think what's interesting is how the state has historically recently been really creative and proactive about trying to get these things on the ground. And I know that recent events and recent decisions have maybe backtracked it as we talked about with the panel. But I do think that that's one of the things with the broader coastal system that really folks should be aware of that has been ongoing.
Well, just quickly, I know we didn't talk about this in curveball. Funding is such a hard issue for the state of Louisiana. We are not a very rich state comparatively. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the Coastal Master Plan has been funded historically?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, a lot of the funding over since 2010 and a couple of years after that has really been coming from restore funds from the settlement of BP oil spill. And so that money has been very helpful and instrumental in moving forward some really large projects and getting those on the ground. And the money that was allocated to support the Mid-Barry Sediment Diversion was also going out of that funding largely. And I think that has been something where, yes, it was in response to an event that happened and that money came, but using that to think through how to invest and how to be proactive has been really helpful. Unfortunately, we are getting pretty close to the time period when that money is no longer going to be available for the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, 2032. Okay, so yeah, it gets closer every day. And I think, there are a lot of folks who are thinking really hard about how to continue to fund things, both at the state level, but also, localities are thinking about it as well. And I know with also recent changes to federal funding, and now we're going to go back to what we did talk about yesterday. With recent changes in the availability of grant money to really go towards mitigation and climate adaptation projects being offered and then taken back, and then questions, is it back? I don't know what's going on. I know that strategies are constantly being changed for how to best fund that. But I think, there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter about funding and grants than I am, who are spending a lot of time thinking about how can we leverage things like public-private partnerships, how can we think creatively about combining projects in order to get more bang for our buck when we're putting them on the ground. And so I think, there's a lot more still to be done. And if any of you have really great ideas about how we might go after some additional money and to make sure that we can keep implementing that program, I would be all ears. But going off script a little bit, I would like to know, I know that the city of New Orleans and the work that you do is in part funded, or in a large part funded by some of these federal grants and things. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how some of the changes to that funding landscape has affected your work recently.
Yeah, so actually, all of our green infrastructure work that we do in City Hall is federally funded. Every cent that we spend on infrastructure improvements related to green infrastructure comes from federal funding. It's different pots of federal funding, but one and the same essentially. It's hard to do some of this work and not be self-sufficient when it comes to funding. And this is where, some of the things that Charles was talking about earlier, which is your vote matters. And we have to make sure that we are codifying the work that we do into our policy over time. So it's very hard to plan for future work when we see the landscape of the federal government change. Now, thankfully, the two large grants that we have, one is which is hazard mitigation, and the other is a National Disaster Resilience Fund. Those have not been canceled. We are able to spend that money through 2029, I believe. But so many of our other grants are changing that are not just related to water, but in the resilience field, just sort of in general. So it's hard to kind of take it to the next step of where do we go from here without having solid funding. Now that changes the conversation of what we start to have as the municipality, of how do we start putting that funding forward for ourselves. But it's very hard when you're a city that has a lot of needs and a state that has a lot of needs. So we have to find ways to, I think, show the benefit of the work that we're doing. Whether it's through the numbers that speak to the engineers or the policymakers, we have to start finding ways to validate, for lack of a better word, more so than just observations and it being very subjective. So the funding piece is very, very key for us. There's no legitimate pot funding that we can all pull from and say we have the next stormwater management project or green infrastructure or gray infrastructure. And, our partners with Sewer and Water Board are working through some of the same issues as well, especially because their infrastructure is so large. Infrastructure will always be expensive. It's just the nature of the game across the nation.
And you always got to update it.
And we always have to update it. We don't want to get to another situation where we're 100 years down the line and we haven't done the maintenance to keep it, to the next thing. So funding is a really hard one for us as the municipality. And these are the reasons why we've had conversations internally around what policies can we put in place to make sure that this work is not subjected to the policymakers and the politicians, and it's codified there in front of us.
And that's so important because, as we talked about already earlier today, right? The need for levees, the need for the pumps, so when you get big storms, that's not going away, as you said. And so if we can figure out a way to get folks to realize that and have those resources, I think that's really important. I'm going to piggyback off a question that was asked of the panel earlier. And so I know we're here thinking back, the past 20 years, what has happened since the storm and for the city, for the state. But also, I know we want to think to kind of what's coming up and kind of what does the future hold. And so I'd really like the question I was asked earlier about, what would you say to future generations or to, the young people who maybe do want to be working in the coastal field or in the city and thinking about, infrastructure there? What advice would you give or what would you want to say to, those folks who are interested in kind of pursuing that path?
I'm going to pick on Shelley again because she made a great point. And one of the things that is consistently changing, but I think that we have to continue to promote is awareness and just getting kids outside to observe the environment around them and to see how the world is moving, how the world is changing, how their environment affects their everyday life. One of the things that we've seen that has changed a lot since Katrina is all of these sort of education advocacy groups around this work, particularly one like the Ripple Effect that really starts to target some of the younger kiddos to just start learning about what the environment needs and how things operate. And for, you know, the generation that's sort of immediately behind me, I think there's an interesting balance that I think we have to strike of this is how it was always done and this is how it needs to advance. Because what has worked sometimes does continue to work. It just needs to be brought up to a little bit more of a standard. So I think one of the things that one of the things I learned recently, I went to Singapore and got to work with their water department and learn some things about them. And they have this program, it's called the Active Beautiful Clean campaign. And it's about integrating water and landscape into their everyday life, into all of their development. And I want to kind of take a piece from that to give to the next generation and have them start thinking about like, how do we change our landscape while still honoring where we came from? And educating them that what was done is not always best, but we also don't have to completely change it. So right now, I think there's so much to learn just from seeing what's happening around us and just observing, you know, for a generation that wasn't here for Katrina, they have no idea like what we all went through and why there is such a push to get them to learn. So it's being, you know, it's being present in the moment. And, you know, we had a great meeting just recently for Biden BNV, and some of the master planning that we're trying to do around that. And one of the things that we impressed upon the kids is that they're the stakeholders in this as well. I think so often we focused on us that are sitting in this room, the professionals, and we forget that there's a generation that's getting ready to inherit all this. And getting them to realize that they are stakeholders and that they have a voice in this, I think that's probably the thing that I would impress upon them most. They have a voice, they have logic and reasoning that can be utilized for all the work that we're doing. But I think I want to ask you the same question from the coastal perspective. It's like, what do you want to tell the next generation and what's inspired you to continue this work?
And I also will just say that I recently was asked to go speak to a friend of mine's son's classroom. So a bunch of 8-year-olds trying to explain coastal issues. That is the test. If you want to test for how well you can communicate what you do, try and get 8-year-olds to follow you along. Jury's still out on how well it is. We'll find out soon. But I think that, you know, there are, I think it's important to have folks interested, have folks educated. And I think to a point that was made earlier, you know, involvement in communicating with policymakers, with decision makers and legislators. I think, you know, sometimes we think, oh, well, kids can't vote. So what do they need to know about, you know, the decisions that are being made or how could they be involved? And I think that, you know, I, as a scientist, as somebody who spent way too many years in school thinking about data, thinking about, you know, how can you quantify everything? One of the biggest lessons I learned was that data is great, it's absolutely necessary, but the story is what sticks. And so, you can back it up with numbers, and you have your little charts and your metrics that you put on cards so you don't forget them. But really thinking about how do the things affect you, how do things affect the people that you know and that you see every day, and the places you're in, and how can you communicate that and the importance of that to these folks who aren't necessarily there and living in that space. I think that's a really important thing, and something that I would you know, encourage folks who are just starting to think about how to be advocates for the coast or for the city to think about, you know, why is it important? And then I would also say, we oftentimes are talking about, you know, what are all the problems, right? We're talking about there's a coastal crisis. There are, you know, we're losing land at such a rapid rate. There are all these big things that are happening, and it can get really heavy. And it can feel like, well, what's the point? You know, there's so much going on, and you know, I'm, you know, just one person, or just, you know, one city, or whatever. And I think I stole this from somebody else, so it's not mine. But I really like the phrase "start from yes" and think about how, like, yes, we can find a solution. I don't know what it is yet, or we don't necessarily have all the steps and everything in line for what it's going to be, but it's out there. And if we remember that, you know, we do have that power we can vote, we can, get involved, we can go plant, cypress, trees, we can do all of these things. Just remembering that point that like, there is a solution out there, and we can keep working to find it. And yes, sometimes the story feels really dark and heavy, and we don't necessarily know, how much hope there is out there for some of these things. But I think knowing what the problem is the only way that you're going to be able to solve it. So understanding the scale of the challenge, understanding, why things are sort of going in the right direction or the wrong direction in particular instances, and thinking about how we can kind of keep that momentum going. So I would say start from yes and have your story, have your why for when you're discussing.
Well, let me ask you another one, which is what continues to inspire you to pursue this type of work?
Yeah. Well, I really loved when Charles was speaking earlier about that event at Xavier, because that was, again, so it was a meeting for folks to come and provide their input on the 2023 master plan as it was being developed. And we really, working with Simone and other folks around the room, really wanted to make sure that we were going into places that we hadn't always showed up at, right? We don't want to just go to the same place and see the same people. I love y'all. Very happy to see so many familiar faces in the room. But really wanted to bring young people and folks that maybe we weren't always talking with into the conversation. And I just remember we were getting ready to kind of do the presentation. Folks were getting food, and Brett Haas, who was the executive director of CBRA at the time, came over. He's like, "Krista, I don't recognize too many people." I said, "Brett, that's the point." And so really, I think what keeps me inspired is the number of people who I recognize here today, who I see at so many events and so many or in so many conversations, and have been for years, and I fully expect to continue to be for years. So having that commitment and that sort of longevity of people who have institutional knowledge and understand the history and who said what before, and has the receipts to say, "Excuse me, but didn't we talk about this before?" But then also the fact that there are still so many people who are interested, so many people, whether they know it or not, are already committed to these causes and already are wanting to help out. And I think, it's the people that we already know who are involved in, and the people that are just getting involved in new faces and new voices. I think that's what keeps me inspired, because, like I said, it can get heavy, it can get tired, and having fresh perspectives and people who are freshly excited about it is what can continue to kind of bring hope. Yeah, I mean, I think that on the state level, that's what kind of gives me hope. And I'm wondering if you have a perspective specifically for the city and thinking through, right? We've talked about a lot of the challenges of keeping up with rain and all the challenges with storm protection and all of those things. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about, what keeps you hopeful about New Orleans and about our ability to kind of work with and live with water.
Almost the exact same answer, which is the people. One of the things that we've heard a couple of times now that has really evolved a lot since Katrina is this community advocacy that we see in so many different ways, especially here, and especially at the local level. Yeah, especially at the local level, what we see is you show up to a community meeting and people give you hugs and it's good to see you and it feels like you're hugging your mom and your grandma. But it's this idea that people are advocating for the spaces that they exist in. And it's really hard to look somebody in the face and not do your job properly, and not continue the work, because especially as someone who's from here, like, that is my family out there. That's people who look like me, talk like me, walk like me. And it's really hard to not serve them in the best way possible. And to do that means to show up, and it means to be out there. And look, it's hard. There will always be somebody who's going to scream at your face. But it also kind of makes you take this certain level of ownership that I personally did not have when I first started working at the local level. So there's that side of it, but there's also the side of like this mindset change. Especially from being in a very technical field. If there's one thing that's harder to change than a politician's mind, it's an engineer's mind. We are set in our ways. We like things to be the way that they are. What works, 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 and it will always work. And, we've certainly seen the change in engineering from the big scale infrastructure and sustainable materials, stuff like that. But also this idea of the infrastructure, that's not really something we were doing pre-Katrina. It's definitely not at the scale that we are now. So having, engineers in this technical field start to think differently about how we live with water and how we can use our profession to move that needle is, it's a motion of progress, and engineering can get stagnant sometimes because we like things to work and we are not going to change something that works. But when we find something else that does work, it needs the same purpose and also a little bit more, it starts to just create this really personal experience, I think, for me. And our field is changing. What we're teaching our kids is changing. My mom's an educator for all my life, so the education side of this is incredibly important to me as well. And seeing kids interested in the curriculums that are in front of them, the experiments that are in front of them. We have like STEM NOLA, we have the Ripple Effect that are putting science and education around our environment in front of a kid's face and letting them figure it out. There's something so special about seeing the lights go off in a kid's mind and be like, oh, I get it. I saw an experiment that the Ripple Effect did where they taught kids how too much rain can overwhelm the pump stations. And I saw so many kids. I mean, these are little babies. These are, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And they're like, oh, that's what it was. And I was like, oh my God, we're doing something right. That made my heart so warm. So, it's that level of investment into that next generation that it just keeps this as, even though it's daunting, it's complex, and every day is a new problem, it's still hopeful in that we don't want another anniversary of treating. I'll be honest, I'm sick of this week already. I'm over it. But it's hard to, there's a ridiculous that we have here as well to remember where we came from.
Those are really the questions that we had talked about, and the questions that we had, but we also were, I don't know what we're doing in time, but we.
I think if y'all would be willing, maybe.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then wrap it up and if y'all would be taking time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are questions? Yeah.
Oh, me, I thought you was going to.
Will be one, then the next, so whichever order you all want.
For both of you, considering it's been 20 years since, I'm gonna just stop saying the name, but since the last major storm did damage, what do you think about the progress that has been made? Is it progress or just awareness? And then the other part is, are we moving or doing?
I don't know about enough. I think that.
Are we going in the right direction? How about that?
So I would say this. I think that one of the things that was really interesting to me when I started working for the state, when I started working the coastal program, was just how many people at the state level, so your state senators, representatives, who it didn't matter what side of the political aisle they were on for so long, there's been so much support across everybody for protecting the coast, for having safer communities and really investing in that. So I do think that because we do have that history, and that has been for the past 20 years, we have made a lot of progress. I think that a lot of the money that we've spent across the state has been well invested, and there are projects that are, there's restoration of Queen Bess Island, so you get all your pelicans coming back, right? There's all of these things that we can see are making progress and moving us in the right direction. I do think that there are some folks, and Charles spoke about it very directly, and I think there are, at this moment in time, people who want to halt that progress and who would rather see
money be spent, for whatever purposes they want to see money be spent for. And I think, we are at a moment where there is a roadblock, but I think, at some point, we got to figure out how we're going to just go ahead and get over that, right? And how we're going to move past that roadblock. And so I think, there has been a lot of progress. For a long time, we have a really strong sense of what the right direction is from planning. And that's not just at the state level, but that's in communities across the coast. And I think we just need to really not let go of that while we're trying to fight, whatever's happening here. We got to bring that along with us and say, hey, now here's something here we can show you that we're making progress, and we want to keep doing that, and then hopefully we can get that back on track.
Yes, we have made progress, and I think that's evident just by being in this room. I can't think of, even as I was going through college, I can't think of a moment where this many people of so many different walks of life would be in one room having a conversation about water and about the environment. So there's definitely progress to be made. I mean, we see it in the infrastructure projects, we see it in the money being spent, but there will always be work that needs to be done. And I don't think that's indicative of us not doing our jobs. I think it's just, we talk about climate change, which means our environment is changing. So we have to consistently adapt to that. It's raining too hard, it's hot. We had a Gulf Coast blizzard in June or in January. So there's constantly things that are extremes that are affecting our environment. And I think part of progress is allowing those things to inform us of how we move forward. It's not always, we're going to build an infrastructure plan to take care of snow. But it is something that is now in the back of our mind, even in just like emergency preparedness, a lot of the time, and how we respond to these events. So infrastructure takes a long time to build, and coastal projects take a long time to really see the fruit of what we're doing. But I think the progress has been made sometimes and not the most visible, at least in the immediate. But yeah, there's always going to be progress. Is it enough? TBD.
It's just for people aware that it's a job. Yeah. It's an ongoing thing. It's not something we just, a response.
We're not going to be done.
No, right.
Yeah. Then there's
So kind of the same question, but maybe of specific instance, and mostly for city level, is when I go to Costco in California, it's a permeable parking lot. It's covered with solar panels. When Costco got their development rights here, however many years ago that was, not that long ago, none of that was required of them. What's happening, and that's another funding avenue, right? If these developers are required to put in green infrastructure in order to develop, where's the city now on those things? How are they addressing?
That's a great question. Because technically Costco did have a permeable parking lot, but I don't think it was done very well to the point that it's not permeable anymore. But this is where policy comes in, because the city does have a stormwater ordinance. And every new development or redevelopment over a certain square footage, if they are changing the amount of rainfall runoff that's going into the system, they're required to store that water on the property. And the way that we see that is through green infrastructure, whether it's through detention, permeable pavement, cisterns. We don't really see like green roofs and blue roofs here. But part of what we are also working on is to make those restrictions so tight that you can't just pay a fee to get out of it. And the way that it has been written is that, if you meet these certain requirements, you can store that water, you can pay a fee and get out. The problem with that is that fee has always been one time. It doesn't rain one time. We as the city are then required to consistently manage that rainfall, that excess that you're pushing off into the storm drainage system. And that's some of the policies and type work that our office is working on. The solar and EV battle is a long game that we have to play, but I know there are some policies in place, a little bit more probably on the building side, of bringing buildings up to code and LEED standards. But there is a again, this is the mission of our office, is to be the policy arm of resilience and sustainability. And these, look, the rest of the nation is ahead of us in a lot of things. But we are one of the leaders in green infrastructure. I will say that. And I'm happy to give us a pat on the back on that. But we have a lot to learn from a lot of other places as well. Some of that is even just the materials that we use to do permanent pavement. We've learned over the last 5-6 years what does and doesn't work, what's incredibly expensive, the cost benefit analysis of certain materials just doesn't work for us. So we've had to, there's been a lot of trial and error. I will say that, and it's not always visible. And my colleague Aaron is here, who's our comms manager, and we talk all the time about educating people so that people see the things that we're putting in the ground. Some of the projects that we have are installing tanks under playgrounds. Nobody's going to see that once the playground's put back, but there's a huge benefit that that's serving. So there's a big education piece that has to go around, both internally and externally. And how can we create policy that helps us in the long term, but doesn't make it so difficult that also people don't want to come in and help continue to develop the city. So it's very unique. What else?
Is that just for new buildings?
No, it's for redevelopments as well. I believe you can find it in the.
If I have an existing building
Mhm.
and I just redo the inside,
It doesn't count if you're just doing the interior, because you're not changing how much is coming into the storm system from the exterior of the building. It's very complex, especially when we get
it
to like
is
some of the
complex,
storm.
so we need to control how much water is going in the system, period.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one that we went back and forth about a lot. And again, this is an iterative process. So right now, we're trying to focus on those that are immediately impacting how much is coming into the system. I think there's a longer conversation there around everybody is required to do it no matter what you're doing. But there's also politics that play into that as well. So the lowest hanging fruit is if you're changing the exterior, if you're increasing how much we have to manage, that's the easiest one to do right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? If not, recording.
Yes.
Thought I was going to avoid this today, but. Well, first of all, thank you both so much. Give these ladies a round of applause. And thank you all for coming out today. We really appreciate you joining us for these conversations, and thank you to the rest of our speakers. This has been awesome. Thank you so much to the staff here at the Iron Caillou Center for hosting us. This has been a great space. I do have a couple of announcements for y'all. There's a couple things coming up if you guys want to take some action right now, today even, to help our post. We do have an action alert up at the moment. We didn't spend too much time today talking about the Mr. Go, but the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet is the navigation channel that helps contribute to some of the catastrophic flooding during Katrina. And we are working on pushing the Army Corps to take some faster action on getting some of that restoration work done. There's a QR code up at the table if you want to sign something. We've got that going at the moment. We did talk today about the Coastal Master Plan, some planning going on. And there are a series of community workshops coming up that our coalition is helping to host in coordination with the state on the 2029 Coastal Master Plan, which may seem far away, but we are already well underway in working on that plan. And that includes one meeting in New Orleans East on September 18th. But there's flyers that are there if anyone's interested in learning more about those meetings. And last but not least, I'm going to put my board member hat on for a second. I'm on the board of the New Orleans Water Collaborative, and one of our partners this week, New Orleans Water Week. They have a full schedule of events. You can find out more here. They have several events, many are taking place right here in this space. But I did want to highlight the Watermelon Festival, which is this Sunday from 4 to 8 p.m. At the Ruby Slipper on Broad Street. Please come out and some watermelon and a great time. And my voice is shaking. But we've got cookies and food, and materials, and again, thank you all for coming. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I'll show you. Great.